Hello and welcome to the interview here on France 24. Our guest is the Chief Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, Karim Khan. He joins us from the court in The Hague. Thank you very much for being on the show.
Not at all. Thank you for having me, Mark.
Mr. Khan, you just opened a formal investigation into possible war crimes and crimes against humanity committed in Ukraine. 39 countries have asked you to do so. How important is it to do this at this moment?
I think it's critically important for two reasons. It shows, firstly, it's a trigger mechanism that allows my office to investigate offences within our jurisdiction, namely genocide, crimes against humanity and war crimes. Secondly, it is a collective voice that hopefully will resonate far and wide, that we expect compliance with the laws and customs of war and the Rome Statute from all sides in any conflict. So I think that's a very important step that was taken, and I hope, in fact, and expect more countries will join the 39 over today and tomorrow.
Right. What does it mean concretely? Does it mean that you have already started an investigation? You're sending people to try to gather evidence because that's the work now ahead of you?
Yes, we have started investigations. We received the referral yesterday. I immediately opened the investigation and issued a statement. Today, an advanced team has gone to the region. We're going to look at a variety of issues. Modalities, logistics, and collection and preservation of evidence. So yes, the work has started and will continue, God willing, until we discharge our mandate effectively.
Right. To remind our viewers of an obvious fact, but it's an important one, neither Ukraine nor Russia are a party to the ICC. How much of a problem is it for you, Mr. Khan?
Well, Ukraine is not a party, but in 2014 and 2015, they made two declarations that they voluntarily accepted the jurisdiction of the court for genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. Russia, of course, is not a state party, but we're looking at events that take place not in Russia, but take place allegedly on the territory of Ukraine. And the law binds all parties, all sides to the conflict.
Right. The liability for these crimes is not only limited to those who carry them out. There is also what is known as a command responsibility. So in theory, if crimes are committed by the leaders of the parties involved, that includes President Vladimir Putin, for instance, they could be brought before the ICC for those crimes, correct?
The court's jurisdiction is quite clear. You're quite right. There's individual criminal responsibility. It can be those that commit and aid and assist or incite crimes within our jurisdiction, or it can be superior responsibility of military commanders or civilian superiors. We're at the stage of trying to get to the truth, and we will do that, God willing, independently and impartially, looking at the evidence, and then we'll see, is there individual criminal responsibility, and if there is, we will take the necessary action.
Even to the very top, if need be.
It's one of the principles of the law, that the law must bind everybody. There's a saying from England, if you forgive me, on France 24, the king is under no man but God and the law. And it's very important that this principle of essential legal obligations based upon these elemental considerations of humanity must bind us together, and they must be investigated and enforced. And the International Criminal Court is here, hopefully, to narrow the impunity gap and to ensure credible, independent, non-political and impartial investigations.
Right. From what you have seen and started to gather, I assume, have you already seen what would amount to such crimes? We've seen civilian buildings being shelled, schools, hospitals.
Yes, it's clear. I mean, I'm not at the stage to make any conclusions, but of course one sees with concern some of the information on the screen, and also from looking at the events that took place in Ukraine from 2015 relating to all sides. Of course, at the moment, we know very clearly that if civilians are directly targeted, if civilian residences or locations are targeted, that is a crime. And it's no defense to say that there may be military necessity if wide-ranging weapons are used, weapons that are not precise or that have a large footprint in very heavily populated civilian areas. So the law already has established this principle, but I want to add, if I may, Mark, that as we see on our TV screens, that fighting is now moving into urban areas. I am particularly concerned that crimes against and affecting children and crimes of sexual gender-based violence, whether in the houses as there's street fighting, but also in places of detention. These are crimes that we're going to really put resources on also to make sure that hopefully there can be a degree of deterrence, a degree of compliance with what every soldier, every belligerent party from any side to the conflict are required to uphold. And I think that's very important. I'd much rather the court also play a small role, perhaps, in preventing the excesses. But if excesses are committed, we have to show the stamina, the collective will, and the principle to hold high the flag of international law and the Rome Statute to make sure that these acts are put before independent and impartial judges who will then assess the individual criminal responsibility.
Right. To take a very concrete example, we've seen images of a university being targeted in the town of Kharkiv. I mean, would that be, to be very concrete, a crime for the court?
That I can't comment. I haven't seen the location. I don't know. These are technical issues. One has to see whether or not what's been taking place at that location, if there was belligerent action so that it became a legitimate military target, what kind of weapon or ordnance was used. One thing I'll say is that since Nuremberg and since the 20 years of the Rome Statute being in force, it is clear to any military commander, to any soldier, that there is this principle of accountability, and the laws and customs of war, whether it's the grave breach provisions of the Geneva Convention, whether it's the laws and customs of war or the Rome Statute, they demand basic minimum standards of behavior in conflict. Picking up a gun or having a mortar on one's shoulder or being in a plane or any other military apparatus does not give one a license to be indiscriminate. Indeed, it increases the obligation to show discernment and distinction so that one doesn't target civilians, children, and those non-military targets.
Right. Our investigative team here, it's called the France 24 Observer, they have documented the use by the Russians of cluster munitions in Kharkiv on February the 28th. Amnesty International Human Rights have also documented at least 2 other instances of such munitions being used by Russian forces. Is the use of such cluster munitions considered a war crime?
What is very clear is that using wide-range weapons, indiscriminate weapons, particularly such weapons in populated areas, can give rise to criminal responsibility. It wouldn't be appropriate, given my obligation to be independent and impartial, to speak about a particular case. But certainly, going back to my first point, simply because one has cluster bombs or thermobaric weapons doesn't mean they can be used when the main effect or a significant effect is against the civilian population. And we will look into all such allegations with some penetration, hopefully.
Right. As you mentioned, the probe goes back, if I'm not mistaken, to November 2013. So obviously there was the annexation of Crimea, the war in Donbass, if you will. And so I imagine you must already have strong documentation of those past events that could eventually feed into the new accusations, correct?
Indeed, there has been a preliminary examination that took place for some years until December 2020, when the preliminary examination closed. And that dealt with a range of allegations. And we received communications regarding all parties, in fact. So we will look at the evidence, we will conduct our investigations, and ultimately any side to the conflict, whether regular troops, militias, self-defense forces, must realize that they have an obligation to comply with the laws and customs of war and the provisions, in fact, of the Rome Statute. And this court and this office have to be part of the collective will to bring some sanity by way of commonly accepted international juridical principles to this theatre, particularly at this moment in time.
Right. Last question, Mr. Khan. We know the tension that followed the opening of a formal probe into Afghanistan against your predecessor coming from the United States. Are you concerned that you might face the wrath of another permanent member of the Security Council, Russia, because of what you've just decided?
No, I think, Mark, I think I was quite well aware of the difficult mandate when I applied for the job. I've become aware of it even more perhaps since June. And I think one needs to show courage and independence and impartiality. And if one doesn't, like a military commander, if you can't take the responsibility of command, don't assume it. I've assumed the responsibility of command as the prosecutor of the ICC. It's my non-derogable obligation to use my best efforts with the resources I have available to vindicate the Rome Statute principles as effectively as possible, realizing, of course, there's resource constraints and many difficulties. But hopefully with stamina, with collective will, and with the professional staff in the office, I hope we can make a positive difference and get to the truth.
Karim Khan, Chief Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, I want to thank you very much for appearing here on the France 24 interview. Thank you for watching it, and stay tuned for more news.